We're with Danae Ringelmann from Indiegogo. Thanks for being with us. So this crowdfunding platform, did you ever think that this would get this big?
Yeah.
You wanted it to.
Of course. I mean, that's why we started it, is we knew that fundraising was a massive problem. I got started in this over 6 years ago now. I was working on Wall Street in finance, but started helping filmmakers and theater producers by night, and quickly realized how frustrating and unfair and inefficient the fundraising process was. We had all these classic finance principles that large Wall Street firms and large organizations could tap into, but the independent creator, the independent small business man or woman, the independent artist didn't have access to any of that, and because of that, thousands and probably millions of ideas went unborn every year due to that lack of access to capital.
So give us an idea of how many people you've worked with now, how many campaigns that you've supported.
Sure. Indiegogo is now in every country of the world. I think that's 200 plus some. And we're distributing millions of dollars to thousands of campaigns every single week. And that includes everybody from entrepreneurs, like small businesses who are trying to get their next food cart launched or web app launched or video game launched, to artists like dance companies or filmmakers, to causes. So people raising money for a health procedure, to traveling across the world, to all kinds of things.
So in the context of this conversation or conference that's been happening today, what are the kind of key learnings that either you've picked up or that you can end up distributing to people when they're thinking about their campaign and how to close that gap from, you know, watching a beautiful video or seeing a piece of art and saying, take this action? And in this particular case of Indiegogo, it's usually raise money, but how do you cross that bridge?
There's 3 keys to success in crowdfunding, and it's the same keys that I heard today here at the conference, and how to activate your community through social media, et cetera. And that first is to be personal. Personalize your story. So whether it's a business you're starting or it's a peace movement that you're leading, make it personal. Who are the people behind it? Who are you? Why are you passionate about this? We actually know that on Indiegogo, when you do a crowdfunding campaign, when you put a video in your campaign and you talk about not just about the project, but who you are, you will raise on average 114% more than campaigns that don't. And the second is to be clear with the ask, whether it's to share it with friends, to share it with people that you know would be excited about the same project, whether it's to fund $10, $100, whatever it may be very clear. The power of technology and crowdfunding specifically is that it's made the ability to help and participate. It's completely removed the friction to do that. When you wanted to be part of something, like say you wanted to help a friend make a film, you'd have to quit your job for forever, or you volunteer for a day, hand out postcards on the corner. I mean, that's a lot of energy and effort. Now you can help with the click of a button and the price of a cup of coffee. And so we see 4 reasons why people fund anything on Indiegogo, and that includes passion, to participation, to pride, to actually getting the perk. And so you want to tap into all of those motivations.
Yeah, the perk reminds me of public media's pledge drives all the time. People are doing it for the tote bag. But what's something in the crowdfunding space that you're thinking about in a way that we haven't even thought about yet? In the sense that just for a lot of people, just this very idea that I could get funding from all these people that I've known on the internet or other places was relatively new a few years ago. But now, kind of, what's that next step or evolution of where crowdfunding's headed?
So crowdfunding, a lot of people think, is a great new alternative complementary form of finance, which it totally is. It's a great new way to raise money that especially has been locked out of the traditional financing options like banks or lending or VCs or even foundation capital. So clearly most people gravitate to crowdfunding because of that financial opportunity. However, the biggest benefits I actually think are not the funding. And we're seeing this especially as it play out in the entrepreneurship world as well as the activism cause world. The benefits are about the activation that you get and the marketing and the testing that you do. So for entrepreneurs, for example, you get smarter faster on the product or service that you want to launch because you get the feedback from people as to what they want. And it's not just a like button or someone saying, I think I'd buy that product. They're actually funding you. They're voting with their dollar. And when someone does that, that's a far better indicator that they actually want your product or service to exist. So we're seeing a whole revolution now in business that large companies to small entrepreneurs to makers to tinkerers, inventors, everybody is using crowdfunding, not just to raise money, but to actually test their market and learn what their customers and supporters actually want.
Sorry, go ahead.
And then on the nonprofit side, crowdfunding is an incredible way to actually activate and more deeply engage with your audience. You're not just asking them to like you on Facebook, you're actually asking them to fund you. And when someone parts with hard-earned cash to support something, psychologically it reinforces their support for your effort, and so they want to do more to make sure that it continues to go well, and that they're known for their involvement, and that they get their friends involved, and they can turn their social capital into financial capital.
So how do you, what have you learned about continuing that engagement and conversation with those people who've supported you? So in the campaigns that have worked in Indiegogo, what have you really seen? Oh, like, wow, this person went back and here's how they kept communicating and now took what could have been a $5 funder and turned them into a community member, a champion that may give more in the future.
It's all about consistent, open, and transparent communication. We know that campaigns that do an update, which is on Indiegogo, what that means is when you do an update on your site, it automatically gets emailed out to all your funders. Campaign owners that do that every 1 to 5 days raise on average 100% more. And campaigners that continue to do their updates post-close, so even when the campaign has ended, to keep their funders up to date as to what the progress of the project is, they can actually then go back and do more campaigns in the future. So a great example of this was Matt Inman, who's a comic blogger online. Yep. He first used Indiegogo because he wanted to raise money for 2 charities. He was actually, I think, anyway, it's a long story, but he was getting sued, and rather than pay lawyer fees, he wanted to kind of make a statement about that and say, I'd rather spend money and give it to charity than to spend money on lawyer fees. So he went online and reached out to his audience, and they responded and were activated, and they got very involved, and he ended up raising $250,000 for these 2 charities. Fast forward, that's when he learned the power of crowdfunding, how he can truly activate his audience and let them participate in his own success, which is really the crux of crowdfunding. He then stumbled upon his next issue, which was the fact that the Nikola Tesla's lab in New York was going to be destroyed, and he thinks he's a huge fan of Tesla, and he thinks he's been ignored from the history books, and he wanted to do something about it, and he wanted to turn his lab into a museum. And so he went to the New York State government and said, hey, you got to refurbish this, you got to preserve this and make it a lab. And they said, well, this is tax dollars. Should we spend our tax dollars on this or other things? They're like, we will if you can prove that the people actually want it. And so he went to the people, he turned on an Indiegogo campaign, and he raised $1.4 million. So he took his first set of funders from his first campaign and parlayed them into his next campaign. So literally he's empowering his audience to be part of his own success throughout his career.
All right, Danae Ringelmann from Indiegogo, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hello again. Hi, if I can have your attention, go ahead and continue to eat. And I hope your minds are as full as your stomachs from the wonderful morning of ideas and inspiration. And still, there's more. Go ahead. But first, standing here in this beautiful atrium, in this testament to our country's aspirations to peace, Let me recognize the exemplary work of the USIP Center for Innovation for Media and Peace Building and the thought leadership it has provided at the nexus of media, peace building, and public diplomacy. And thank you to my friend Sheldon, who provides so much of this leadership, and the incredible team here at USIP. So thank you. I am so pleased to introduce our next speaker, a woman whose own leadership has made a difference to so many. Pat Harrison is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the leading funder of public radio and public television programming for the American people. In 2011, Pat created American Graduate, Let's Make It Happen, a nationwide public media initiative to help communities across the country identify and implement solutions to the high school dropout crisis. Pat is also the chair of the advisory board of Women and Girls Lead, an innovative public media initiative led by ITVS designed to focus, educate, and connect women, girls, and their allies across the globe to address the challenges of the 21st century. In August 2012, Pat was included on the Forbes list of Women Changing the World in Media for establishing Women and Girls Lead and her continued leadership on the project. Prior to joining CPB in 2005, Pat served as Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs and Acting Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Pat Harrison.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Tamara. It's a joy working with her and everything she does through ITVS, Women and Girls Lead, and public media. And of course, I want to express my appreciation to Jim Marshall and Kristen Lord with USIP, and of course, Sheldon Himmelfarb, Director of the Center for Innovation, for your partnership with ITVS hosting this conference. I'm also particularly pleased to see Sherry Carter here and Mike Graham, who I worked with in a previous incarnation. So many great things happen here in this wonderful building, USIP, and it's just a positive environment that encourages productive dialogue that leads to conflict resolution. And today we have an opportunity throughout the day to consider how media that moves millions can work toward those goals and not against them. Just a few months ago, here at USIP, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting honored Lourdes Garcia Navarro. She is the foreign correspondent, I hope many of you listened to her, with NPR. And we presented her with the Edward R. Murrow Award for courageous reporting, which takes her to some very dangerous places so we can understand beyond a soundbite and have knowledge of the events shaping our world and impacting our lives. I thought it was interesting, and I think it was John Nesbitt, the author of Megatrends, who said that in today's media landscape, we are drowning in information, but we are starved for knowledge. And the fact is that peace building starts with knowledge, understanding, and then one hopes mutual respect. Through public media, whether it's radio, television, film, online, on air, and in the community, we truly do celebrate knowledge and lifelong learning. Our reporting is trusted because it relies on high journalistic standards and editorial integrity. And these values are very much in place over many platforms through PBS NewsHour, NPR, dynamic reporters such as Hari Srinivasan, through our local journalism centers and participation of citizen journalists throughout the country. On the content side, we truly are America's storyteller, and a good story includes diverse voices. You could say that public media's independent filmmakers and producers, like Mara Shemaev, function in a way as global diplomats, honoring these stories, capturing the voices, and treating the subject matter with great respect. And the result can be a film, a documentary, a series such as Half the Sky that leads us to understand, to have knowledge of people we may never, ever meet, and the challenges they face just trying to live lives of dignity, free from fear and harm. Recently, the U.S. Institute of Peace Center on Gender and Peacebuilding hosted an important symposium to expand the global dialogue on conflict related to violence against women. And it seems just impossible that even today, 2013, in too many places, women and girls are targeted for attack. Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide, the book and the PBS series of films, has moved millions of people to be agents for positive change. And I want to thank Paula Kerger, she's not with us today, the CEO of PBS, Jennifer Lawson, who is our Senior Vice President for Television and Digital Video Content at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, for her leadership, her commitment to this important series. I also want to mention Meridian International, on whose board I serve, and IREX. And I have to say the groundbreaking work of Milan Verveer and the support from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, focusing on women and girls worldwide. All of this created a perfect storm. ITVS, our partners in public media under the leadership of Sally Pfeiffer, working with America's public media stations virtually in every community in the country, and organizations such as the Girl Scouts of America and so many others are working together on behalf of women and girls worldwide. And social media, of course, plays a crucial role to shine a light in real time on the obstacles, celebrate the triumphs, and keep the pressure on to keep these agents of change from harm. The goal is sustainable protection for all the invisible children, all the invisible girls, all those invisible women, and the issues that have been invisible before we had the ability to use technology to connect so fast and so virally to make a difference. Those of us who believe in the mission of public media to serve citizens with high-quality content, and our goal is to educate, to inform, to inspire, and yes, to entertain. We are so very proud that Nick Kristof has chosen to tell the story of the women in Half the Sky through public media, utilizing many platforms and, as I said, community engagement. I have introduced Nicholas Kristof many times, and the challenge for me is finding different ways to do it. So I went online, of course, and I really had not read this before, so I'm going to quote someone you all know, former President Bill Clinton. We should all have him say something like this about us. It's amazing. He said, "There is no one in journalism anywhere, in the United States at least, who has done anything like the work he, Nicholas, has done to figure out how poor people are actually living around the world and what their potential is, so that every American citizen who cares about this should be profoundly grateful that someone in our press establishment cares enough about this to haul himself around the world to figure out what is going on." And then the president said, "I am personally in his debt, as are we all." And that's not all. There's more. Wait. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation says that a page one article by Nicholas Kristof in 1997, so he's been working on this for a very long time, about child mortality in the developing world, helped the couple move toward global health as a focus of philanthropy. Talk about moving millions. As you all know, and the world knows, Nicholas Kristof, of course, is co-author with his wife, Cheryl Wu Dunn, of Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide, through his book, the PBS documentary, and now the Facebook game, Half the Sky. I don't want to say has fueled a global movement. It is fueling a global movement supporting women and girls. He was an early adopter of social media. He now has more than 1.4 million Twitter followers, which is why he does not respond to my tweets. Please welcome Pulitzer Prize honoree twice, New York Times journalist, courageous truth seeker, Nicholas Kristof. Oh, you could do that.
Thank you. Thank you, and boy, I'll get on answering those tweets right away. I should also say that, I appreciate the thanks for, us bringing Half the Sky, having you as the outlet, but boy, we were lost puppies looking for a home, and you took us in. So, Pat, we are so grateful to you and to CPB, ITVS, PBS for giving a superb outlet that brought the issues to a much greater audience. And, that is so much of what the theme is here today. People are sort of surprised sometimes that a New York Times columnist should be dabbling in these sort of new media. I always feel a little bit like a prehistoric fish trying to, scramble out of the water and develop lungs. And I should say that I'm a little bit of a fraud at this. I try very hard, but it's not intuitive. And if you do want to get insights from somebody to whom it really is intuitive, then the person who has been handling the Half the Sky movement social media and does it magnificently and is busy tweeting right now but won't tweet this about herself is Liriel Higa, who is right there. Liriel, do you want to stand or wave? I saw I think both the peril and promise of social media really in particular when I went to Bahrain as a reporter. And in Bahrain, the government media really only report the government side of the equation. And it's a quite wealthy country. Everybody is connected, so everybody is on social media. And so sure enough, there were quickly several Facebook pages demanding that the New York Times fire me, and others, saying that I should pretty much be sainted and sort of battle in between. And I was vigorously tweeting the Arab Spring in Bahrain there, and the government opened fire on protesters one day. I was at the hospital tweeting as the injured were brought in. And in the course of the shooting of the melee, I'd been separated from my friend who had my charger. After a little while, of course, my phone ran out of juice, so I couldn't tweet anymore. But I was staying there doing my reporting. And then the word spread in the hospital that an American had been shot. And so I was looking all over looking for this American. More details came in. I couldn't access Twitter, so I really wasn't too sure of the details, but the rumors in the hospital were this was an American man. He'd been shot in the neck. He was injured, but alive. And I looked all over, and for all the chaos, he didn't seem to be there. Well, then I was finally reunited with my charger and was able to look at the Twitter feed, and I realized that this supposedly injured American was me. Because I hadn't been tweeting, people had quickly jumped to conclusions and were either mourning me or celebrating. And it was sort of a reminder that there is tremendous power here to spread news very quickly in a matter of urgency, but also that sometimes it can depart quite a bit from the facts. The reason I think that I first really began to experiment a great deal in some of these new forms really was when I was reporting in Darfur in 2004 in particular. And it was so frustrating to go again and again to Darfur and see villages that had been massacred, vast sections of the population that had been undergoing mass rape, people displaced, and yet it felt like my columns were just kind of disappearing without a ripple in the Times. And then at about that same time, I don't know if any of you remember, but that roughly the same time in New York, in Central Park, there were a couple of red-tailed hawks. The male was called Pale Male, and his wife, so to speak. They had their nest in an apartment building right next to Central Park, and the building didn't like the hawk droppings and took down their nest. And New York was all up in arms about these two homeless red-tailed hawks. And I thought, how can it be that I can't generate more outrage over the entire population of Darfur being slaughtered and raped as there is outrage over the two homeless hawks? And that kind of led me to think more deeply about how we connect, what it is that makes us connect, and to the work in particular of a fellow called Paul Slovik, who's done a lot of research on this in social psychology. And one of his lessons is the importance of individual stories, that we connect not through the rational side of our brain, but through the emotional side. And I think we all know intuitively that empathy drops as the number of victims goes up. But the point at which empathy begins to drop is when n equals 2. The moment you have a second victim, then our empathy is reduced. And so one of the lessons is the importance of beginning, at least, with an individual story that will get people to care about that individual. And then you can slowly add things on and add the statistics and make it a larger tableau. But it starts with individuals. And the other thing that he emphasizes is that people get turned off by a story that is just depressing. What they want is something where they can actually make a difference. And I think that if you look at how issues of global concern are often sort of marketed to the world, one is there's talk about a great number of victims, and the other is there's an emphasis on everything that is going wrong, on the cup being half empty. And in fact, I think we really should be doing the opposite, talking initially about one individual and then talking about the progress. And usually they're both that are true, and we tried very much to do that in Half the Sky. In retrospect, I think we would have done that even more, emphasize the uplift that is possible. There are a couple of other reasons why I tried to emphasize this. One is that, frankly, we in the newspaper business, we're desperately searching for a new business model. We don't know what that is, but what we have right now is not very satisfying, and we sort of think and hope that building social networks is going to be one way of finding an emerging business model for us. And if you look at newspaper valuations over the last 10 years and you look at social network valuations, boy, they're onto something. We had our social networks in the form of our readers, and we kind of let that slip through our fingers. And so that is, that was one reason. The other is that I simply, care a lot about some issues, and social media are a way to get the word out about them. And one great advantage of Twitter in particular is that it's really pretty hard to bore somebody in 140 characters. Now, you can do that pretty effectively in an 800-word column, but there are some issues that people will hear you out for 140 characters where they just would not, they would tune you out for a column. For example, AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act, hugely important issue for Africa's economic development, but it's about trade, which is, starts off being a pretty boring issue, and so nobody writes about AGOA, nobody really knows about it. One can actually tweet about it, and I have found that people will actually read those tweets, and just in the last few days, I've been tweeting about a 15-year-old girl in the Maldives. You may have read this, 15-year-old girl who had been raped and now has been sentenced to be lashed 100 times, effectively for being raped. And this is the kind of thing that I'm on leave from my column anyway now, but it might be hard to justify, a full column about one particular case in the Maldives. But on Twitter, one can do a certain amount to embarrass the Maldives government and shine a light on that kind of practice. Essentially, we're in the lighting business here. And when you shine a light on something, it really does make a difference. It's a variation of the Heisenberg effect. what I have sort of groped toward doing. It's a combination of Twitter, Facebook, Google+, sort of experimenting a little bit with Pinterest, Instagram. I think that people often emphasize Twitter kind of at the exclusion of some of the others. And Facebook, boy, Facebook is a really powerful medium. Don't forget that in your social media engagement. People spend a lot of time on Facebook. And my sense is that one Facebook follower is worth several Twitter followers in terms of actually getting resonance, getting traction out there. For Half the Sky, we've also been trying to experiment. And we don't know whether these things will work or not. The game, both the Facebook game and then there are mobile games in Africa and India, these are experiments. And one of the things I learned in the news business is that we, in news organizations, didn't experiment enough, partly because we were very protective, I think, of our franchise. And I think as the world changes, we need to be very willing to make mistakes, to take risks. And that is what this game is, and we hope that it is going to be a way to reach a new audience and expand. But I really encourage you, those of you who are in this game, to take those risks, to try new things, to be ready to fail periodically. People always ask about the extent to which social media are changing the world. And, you know, I guess I'd say that it is, but that it's more evolution than a revolution. And part of that is that I remember, you know, in the 1970s, people talked about how photocopiers were going to be this amazing new technology that was going to end depression. And then in the 1980s, it was the fax machine. And then in the 1990s, it was the mobile phone. And now it's social media. And it is, you know, this is all true. But I'd say that in Arab Spring, for example, I would say that while Facebook and Twitter and YouTube were enormously important, that on balance across the region, I think it might well be true that the Arabic language satellite television broadcasts may have been even more important. They went to a large number of people, and they presented a narrative of events that the government in each individual country could not control. So there are a lot of things working here, you know, all together. I do think that social media brought a few different changes. One is that they showed critics of the government, dissidents out there, if you will, that there were a lot of like-minded people who also didn't like the government, who also were really upset about corruption. They created a community of the disaffected and thereby made people somewhat bolder as a result. I think, secondly, they also raised the costs of repression, because once it became evident that there were going to be, that if police start clubbing protesters in the street, then that is going to go viral, that is going to go out there, and it makes governments think twice before they send in people who are clubbing. Now, at the end of the day, as in Syria, they may well decide that the only way to stay in power is to shoot protesters. And at the end of the day, if it's bullets against tweets, bullets will win. I think there's a mistaken impression sometimes that what leads to the overthrow of a government is when people get outraged enough at it. Sometimes that works. Most of the time, what leads people to overthrow a government is the thought that they can get away with it, that they're not going to be shot. And social media can help in that process, but it becomes a pretty unequal battle in places like Syria these days. And the other advantage of social media in this context is that it creates real opportunities to mock governments. And I think this is something that authoritarians are really vulnerable to being mocked, to being laughed at. Boy, you know, Facebook and Twitter are just brilliant at that. And it becomes very difficult, even with controls, to get around that. China, as you know, doesn't allow Twitter. They have Weibo, which is kind of microblogging, very similar to it. And so because June 4th is a very sensitive term in China, because that was the day that the Tiananmen protests were suppressed in 1989. So you can't use the term Liu Se, which is June 4th, in Weibo. So people get around it. Instead of saying June 4th, they write things like May 35th. And, you know, people are pretty clever getting around these kinds of things. And I guess, you know, one special message I'd really just like to encourage everybody to think about. One of the things that really frustrates me is that as a journalist, all the time I get pitches from various companies about products that, you know, don't matter at all to the world. And these are incredibly well-done pitches. A lot of thought has gone into them, a lot of professional marketing expertise. And then at the same time, I will get pitches about issues that really do matter immensely to the world. Girls' education, sanitation, clean water, AIDS, malaria. And those pitches usually are done much, much less effectively. And I think that one reason is that there is a perception in the kind of social justice or humanitarian community, if you will, that if the cause is important, then one doesn't really have to, then it's almost beneath one to put a lot of professionalism in the marketing of it. That marketing is what Coca-Cola does. It's not what malaria does. And there's also, I think, sometimes a sense that if one is in the business of fighting poverty, that maybe marketing should be kind of poverty-driven as well. And, you know, that is not the case. It is so much more important to market, if you will, to sell, if you will, issues like girls' education or AIDS or malaria or sanitation or water, any of these issues, than it is to market Coca-Cola or Pepsi. And I think we will need to get better at this in particular because I hate to say this, but my impression is that the U.S. is headed for a period when we're looking inward. I think that historically the U.S. has mostly been a fairly inward-looking and insular country, and after 9/11, something happened and we looked outward. You know, we were attacked and we spent a dozen years looking outward. I think that era has come to a close, partly because of the economic downturn and partly because your average American thinks, well, we tried engaging with the world in Iraq, we tried in Afghanistan, and what has that brought us? You know, we're done with the world for a while. I don't think that is going to be an approach that is effective, but I see that signs of that all around. There was just, in connection with the sequester, the Pew just did a survey asking people, well, what programs specifically they would like to have cut, what government programs. And they asked about 19 specific programs. And in 18 of those 19, voters said, no, I don't want that one cut. I want it the same level or actually increased. There's only one where a majority did not want it sustained, and that was foreign aid. Likewise, you may know that ABC News, for a time, had a cooperative arrangement with the Gates Foundation, where the Gates Foundation paid $1.5 million to ABC News to cover global health and nutrition issues. And this led to some great reporting that got these issues before the American public. And in effect, Gates Foundation was, in a sense, bribing ABC News to cover these really important issues. They won prizes for it. I thought it, you know, worked really well. But ABC News, at the end of that, they did not renew it. Because even though these are really important issues, and even though they won prizes, there was a feeling that viewers weren't interested, that you're better off covering celebrities, Democrats and Republicans yelling at each other, that kind of thing. And so I'm afraid that in the coming years, we in the news media are going to be less helpful in shining a light on important global issues. And that means that more of the burden is going to fall on, in effect, all of you. And that is going to mean better storytelling. It's going to mean better use of social media. And it's going to mean all kinds of creative ways to try to find new directions, whether it's gaming or whatever else it may be, to reach audiences and get them to care. And that would be my challenge for you. Thanks very much.
here with Pat Harrison from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So what is public media's role in the types of campaigns that we've seen talked about on stage today, Half the Sky or the Coney, or what does public media bring to the table?
Well, first, when you talk about public media, I just want to establish this is the only media in the United States that is for free and commercial free. So right away what we bring to the table is the ability to tell a story without interruption, beyond a soundbite, do that deep dive, really get to know the people who are in the story. And more, those are the stories that we're covering, stories of women and girls and struggles around the world, but also right here in the United States. So whether it's through Frontline or PBS NewsHour or documentaries or working with wonderful filmmakers through ITVS, our goal is to tell the story with integrity.
I think we're live on the live stream, so to speak. That's what's coming back and through
Oh,
the system. That's
I
very
thought
funny.
that sounded familiar to me. Like,
that's all right.
who is that woman?
It's a 30-second delay. So
Okay.
We're kind of in the future, but not really. So let's talk a little bit about when you see something like this, Half the Sky, what happened through PBS and ITVS and all the partners that were on stage. What does it make you think of in terms of the potential of what you can do next?
I think it shows us, whether it's through Half the Sky or the new series Makers, Women Who Make America, the opportunity for us to understand that no matter how large the challenges, the problems, they begin with us. It's not somebody else who's going to take care of the issue, whatever the issue is. It begins with average people caring about something. They get together, they're part of the PTA. It's Americans join organizations all the time. And in fact, when visitors come from other countries on international exchanges, one of the first things they comment about is the volunteer ethic here. Mm-hmm. We are just almost pre-designed to try to figure it out for ourselves. Public media in this country, actually it's the only one set up, only system set up this way in the entire world, is the best example of a public-private partnership. And what that means, the very crucial amount of money we get from the federal government is then more than multiplied 6 times as stations get what I call a report card from the community. Are we of value to the community on a local level with national content, engaging with that community on every issue of concern? So Half the Sky is an example. It's almost a symbol of what can happen right here. It's not what can happen outside of our community, but when people of goodwill come together, they can affect change. They can keep that young person on the path to a high school diploma. Once you know that, then it's hard to turn away and say it's somebody else's problem.
And in work with the American Graduate Series this year, I mean, you really saw those, like, what are, in the conversation that came up today as well, how do you measure the effectiveness of your campaign or awareness? And there it's a relatively simple measure. It's like, are more students staying in high school or dropping out, right?
Yes, and I appreciate, Hari, all the work you have done on American Graduate. You have to have hope. You can't feel we're taking on an issue that has no possible resolution. But with American Graduate, it speaks to the fact that these young people start out with so much hope. They are so proud to be in school, and somewhere between kindergarten and the end of their high school years, if they even get to that point where they're seniors, they drop out. That hope has gone away. However, through all of the work, not just public media, but organizations such as America's Promise Alliance, the Center for Excellence in Schools, Community in Schools, working together, not blaming teachers or parents or students, everyone working together to communicate to that young person, you're something, you're an American, we care about you. Now, we see all those bumper stickers that say my son or daughter is an honor student, and that's really great. But we want bumper stickers that say, I care about all these American kids. We want them all to go from high school on to college, to career, to have a life of contribution. So through American public media, through public media stations, on a local level, we're cutting the problem into manageable parts. And we're seeing the numbers go down.
So I'm not going to say this is all because of American Graduate, but you see when people work together, good things happen.
All right, Pat Harrison from CPB, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Las autodenominadas Fuerzas Armadas.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول.
Yes, Khalid's murder helped topple Mubarak, but the old regime is still very much alive.
If it was not for the case of Khalid Saeed, they may never have been able to be given the chance to contest these elections.
The answer is obvious, the cell phone. I mean, it's the quickest and fastest way to get to the people who need it.
$4 million in about 24 hours.
Nick and I wanted to galvanize people into action because we know it takes a world to bring about this change.
We started something, a community.
I have friends that have been living in this conflict their entire life. Fight for that, because that is what is going to change this world, and that is what defines us.
We got creative, and we got loud.
It's not over! It's not